Have you ever had a personal relationship with Donald Trump?
What do you mean by personal relationships?
Have you socialized with him?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever socialized with Donald Trump in the presence of females under the age of 18?
Though I'd like to answer that question, at least today, I'm going to have to assert my 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights, sir.
How does a man without a college degree, without a public company, without a visible invention or empire, find himself dining with presidents, princes, Nobel laureates, and billionaire? How does someone who began as a math teacher in the 1970s end up flying aboard private jets with the architects of global policy? That is the question at the center of Jeffrey Epstein's rise. His story does not begin with power. It begins with obscurity. Born in Brooklyn in 1953 to a working-class family, Epstein did not emerge from elite bloodlines. He attended college, but never completed his degree. And yet, in 1974, he secured a teaching position at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan, an institution known for educating the children of New York's wealthiest families. That first leap is important. Dalton was not merely a school, it was a gateway. A place where proximity to privilege mattered more than pedigree. It was there that Epstein began understanding something critical. Access is currency. Epstein's tenure at Dalton was short-lived. By 1976, he left under murky circumstances. But by then, he had made connections. One of them, Alan Ace Greenberg, CEO of Bear Stearns, would alter his trajectory. Epstein joined Bear Stearns in 1976, despite lacking formal financial qualifications. In a culture where credentials often serve as gatekeepers, Epstein bypassed them. At Bear Stearns, he quickly moved into a niche role advising ultra-wealthy clients on tax strategies and asset recovery. It was quiet work, discreet work, and discretion, in the world of high finance, is invaluable. He cultivated an image, brilliant, mysterious, indispensable. By 1981, he had left Bear Stearns under unclear circumstances again. But instead of fading into obscurity, he did something bold. He declared himself a financial consultant to billionaires. No public track record, no verifiable fund, no transparent strategy. Yet somehow clients came. How? Epstein understood something psychological about power. The ultra-wealthy crave exclusivity. He did not advertise broadly. He positioned himself as someone who worked only for individuals with a net worth exceeding $1 billion. Scarcity increases perceived value. By the late 1980s, Epstein had built relationships with figures in finance, academia, politics, and royalty. His Manhattan townhouse would later become one of the largest private residences in the city. But here is the deeper question. Was his wealth the cause of his connections or the result of them? The answer lies in how he positioned himself not as a financier, but as a connector. He did not merely manage money, he hosted dinners. He brought scientists together with billionaires. He linked politicians with philanthropists. He curated rooms. And in those rooms, influence flowed. The mystery is not simply how Epstein made money, it is how he made himself necessary. In elite circles, being indispensable is more powerful than being rich. And Jeffrey Epstein understood that better than most. Powerful people do not gather randomly. They are introduced, vetted, filtered. Jeffrey Epstein inserted himself into that filtration system. Throughout the 1990s, Epstein began refining his true skill, social engineering. He studied elite culture. He mirrored its language. He adopted its rhythms. He surrounded himself with art, intellectuals, and symbols of refinement. His Manhattan townhouse became a stage. Politicians, academics, business magnates, and cultural figures attended dinners and salons there. Some came for intellectual exchange, some came for philanthropy, some came because others were coming. That is how networks scale. Epstein did not initially present himself as controversial. On the contrary, he positioned himself as a patron of science. He donated to universities. He associated with prominent researchers. He funded discussions on evolution, artificial intelligence, and theoretical physics. In elite circles, intellectual legitimacy confers social immunity. If respected scientists take your calls, if prominent institutions accept your donations, your reputation strengthens, even if few understand precisely what you do. Epstein's strategy was layered. Build financial mystique. Acquire elite endorsement. Host gatherings that blend wealth, politics, and academia. Become the bridge. And bridges are rarely questioned until they collapse. It is important to note, many of those who interacted with Epstein have stated they were unaware of his crimes. Some later publicly distanced themselves. Associations do not automatically imply complicity, but the pattern is undeniable. Epstein built proximity to power deliberately. He understood hierarchy. He targeted individuals who amplified his status. A single photograph with a president, a royal, or a billionaire carries enormous signaling power. Optics become armor. He also cultivated global reach. Properties in New York, Florida, New Mexico, Paris, and a private island in the US Virgin Islands reinforced an image of immense wealth. Wealth attracts influence. Influence attracts wealth. The cycle feeds itself. Yet beneath the curated intellectual salons and philanthropic conversations, darker allegations were quietly forming. And when they surfaced, they would test whether his network was loyalty or illusion. For decades, observers asked the same question: where did the money actually come from? Epstein's finances were notoriously opaque. He described himself as managing money exclusively for billionaires. Yet public records of large investment funds under his name were limited. One of his most well-documented financial relationships was with Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands. Epstein reportedly managed aspects of Wexner's finances for years and was granted significant authority, including power of attorney. That level of trust is rare. Epstein acquired his Manhattan townhouse from Wexner in a transaction that raised eyebrows years later. But even beyond Wexner, the broader structure of Epstein's wealth remained difficult to trace. No major hedge fund filings, no high-profile IPOs, no public investment empire. Instead, there was discretion. Discretion can be legitimate in high-net-worth finance, but opacity also creates mystery, and mystery fuels myth. Epstein cultivated ambiguity. Was he a financial genius, a fixer, a tax strategist, a facilitator of global introductions? The answer seemed to shift depending on who was asked. He reportedly advised clients on complex offshore structures. He navigated legal grey zones. He moved in circles where privacy was paramount. In that environment, transparency is often unwelcome. The fewer people who understand what you do, the more indispensable you can appear. By the early 2000s, Epstein had entrenched himself in elite global networks. Yet, at the same time, allegations of sexual misconduct involving minors began surfacing publicly. And that would become the true test of his network. Would the powerful distance themselves? Or would influence shield him? The answer, when it came, would shock the world. By the early 2000s, Jeffrey Epstein had already achieved something extraordinary. He had embedded himself into the architecture of global influence. But influence, no matter how carefully constructed, is fragile. In 2005, a complaint filed by the parents of a 14-year-old girl in Palm Beach, Florida, triggered what would become the first major criminal investigation into Epstein's activities. Local police began uncovering a disturbing pattern, numerous young girls alleging sexual abuse, many describing similar circumstances. The story should have ended there, but it did not. Instead, what followed would deepen the mystery of Epstein's network. Federal prosecutors became involved. The case appeared substantial. Dozens of alleged victims were identified. Investigators reportedly compiled extensive evidence. And yet, in 2008, Epstein secured a controversial plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to state-level charges related to soliciting prostitution from a minor. In exchange, federal charges were dropped. He served just 13 months in a county jail under a work release arrangement that allowed him to leave for extended hours daily. To many observers, it seemed inconceivable. How does someone facing such serious allegations receive such leniency? Was it legal maneuvering, strategic negotiation, or did influence quietly tilt the scales? At this point, it is essential to tread carefully. Legal outcomes reflect decisions made by prosecutors and judges. Allegations, while serious, do not equate to guilt beyond what courts determine. Yet the optics of the deal ignited public outrage years later when the details became widely known. What is undeniable is this. After his conviction, many of Epstein's high-profile associates did not immediately sever ties. Some distanced themselves, others maintained contact. Social events continued. Photographs surfaced showing interactions with politicians, academics, royalty, and tech executives even after 2008. Why? Elite networks operate differently from public opinion. Reputation within closed circles can be insulated from broader scrutiny, especially when discretion is the norm. Epstein's network did not vanish overnight. It recalibrated. He began positioning himself more aggressively as a patron of science and innovation. He funded research. He met with university leaders. He courted Nobel laureates. Was this image rehabilitation? Or was it a continuation of a strategy he had mastered long before? Embed yourself where moral authority resides. If society sees you dining with scientists and philanthropists, suspicion softens. The facade had cracked, but it had not yet collapsed. And in that fragile space between scandal and accountability, Epstein continued to move. In elite ecosystems, proximity itself is a form of power. A photograph with a former president. A flight log listing a royal. A dinner alongside billionaires. These are not just social interactions, they are signals. Jeffrey Epstein collected signals. Flight logs later released to the public showed numerous high-profile individuals traveling on Epstein's private aircraft over the years. Some of those individuals have stated their interactions were limited, professional, or social in nature, and that they were unaware of criminal activity. It is crucial to recognize that association alone does not establish wrongdoing. But Epstein understood something profound. Being photographed beside power makes you appear powerful. He invested heavily in hosting. His properties were not merely residences, they were stages. Guests entered rooms adorned with art, books, symbols of intellect and wealth. Conversations revolved around science, global policy, philanthropy. In those rooms, Epstein did not appear as a fringe operator. He appeared central. And once someone of high status attends your gathering, others follow. Social proof compounds. It becomes uncomfortable to question someone who is already validated by your peers. This is the architecture of elite trust. Epstein also cultivated international relationships. He maintained connections in Europe and the Middle East. He presented himself as a facilitator, someone who could introduce you to the right person in finance, academia, or politics. Bridges again. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Powerful people often rely on intermediaries. They do not always verify every detail about those intermediaries. They assume that someone so widely connected must be legitimate. Epstein weaponized that assumption. He made himself useful, and usefulness in elite circles can overshadow scrutiny. Yet every network has a tipping point, and by 2018, the tide of public attention was turning once more. If Epstein's network thrived in discretion, it faltered under sunlight. In late 2018, investigative journalism reignited scrutiny over the 2008 plea agreement. Reports detailed how federal prosecutors had declined to pursue more severe charges and had failed to inform victims about the agreement. Public outrage intensified. Suddenly, what had once been whispered about in limited circles was broadcast globally. Questions resurfaced. Why was the deal structured the way it was? Who advocated on his behalf? What did his connections know, and when? It is important to emphasize that investigations focus on actions and evidence, not assumptions based solely on association. Yet the breadth of Epstein's social reach made the story explosive. When federal authorities arrested Epstein again in July 2019 on charges related to sex trafficking of minors, the narrative shifted dramatically. This was no longer a local Florida scandal, it was international. His Manhattan mansion was searched. Evidence was reportedly seized. Media coverage became relentless. And then, on August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell while awaiting trial. His death was ruled a suicide by medical examiners. Yet circumstances surrounding it fueled widespread speculation, conspiracy theories, and distrust. When a man embedded in the world's highest corridors of power dies before trial, the vacuum fills with suspicion. Who was protected? What secrets were lost? Was the network complicit or merely careless? These questions, though dramatic, must be approached responsibly. Speculation without evidence clouds truth. But the psychological impact was undeniable. Epstein's death froze the narrative. There would be no courtroom revelations, no public cross-examination, only documents, depositions, investigations that continue to surface fragments of a complex web. Every network has lieutenants. In Epstein's case, one of the most significant figures was Ghislaine Maxwell. Born into British high society as the daughter of media magnate Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine possessed what Epstein lacked: aristocratic Polish, established elite connections, and social legitimacy in transatlantic circles. Together they formed a partnership that blended ambition and access. Maxwell introduced Epstein to influential individuals. She hosted gatherings. She navigated high society with ease. After Epstein's 2019 arrest and death, Maxwell herself was charged and later convicted in 2021 on charges related to sex trafficking of minors. Her trial provided additional documentation and testimony regarding the operation. It also reinforced a sobering reality. Networks are rarely built alone. They require coordination, social glue, and gatekeepers. Maxwell's background highlights another dimension of Epstein's strategy: proximity to pedigree. By aligning himself with someone deeply embedded in European elite circles, he expanded his reach. This was not accidental. Epstein's ascent was not chaotic. It was structured, layered, intentional. Why do powerful circles sometimes fail to act decisively against one of their own? Part of the answer lies in psychology. Cognitive dissonance. If someone you have dined with, laughed with, collaborated with is accused of wrongdoing, your mind resists. It searches for alternative explanations. He didn't seem like that. There must be more to the story. Elite environments amplify this effect. Reputation becomes a shield. Status distorts perception. Epstein understood this human bias. He surrounded himself with people whose presence signaled legitimacy. That legitimacy made allegations harder to process. Not impossible, but slower. And delay can be protective. Jeffrey Epstein did not invent power. He studied it. He mapped it. He inserted himself between its nodes. His rise reveals uncomfortable truths about how influence operates, quietly, relationally, often without transparency. But his fall, and the global reckoning that followed, reveals something else. No network is invincible. The question is no longer how he built it. The deeper question is why so many systems allowed it to stand for so long. And that question reaches far beyond one man. It reaches into the architecture of power itself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new discovery. Share your thoughts in the comments and join us as we explore history without borders.